About the beginning of autumn, Channel 4 News formed a new investigative unit called the I-Team. 3 reporters, Don Shelby, Larry Schmidt, and Al Austin, were given the time and the resources to explore deep beneath the day-to-day news of our government and our society and find out just how things really work. The first results tonight. The I-Team begins a 4-part series of reports on Minneapolis housing inspectors. And here's Al Austin. Al?
When your neighbor won't clean the rubbish from his yard, when your apartment has no heat, or your landlord won't do anything about rats in the building, you call a city housing inspector. Or you call the mayor or an alderman and he calls the housing inspector. This civil servant represents government at one of its most direct, down-to-earth levels. But in the Minneapolis Housing Inspection Department, all is not well.
Yeah, well, here's the men want to inspect.
You want to inspect?
Yeah, if we could take a general look through here.
Minneapolis housing inspectors are the city's front line against blight and decay. Protectors of the fragile supply of safe, livable rental housing. A difficult job.
I am going to cite things that would be in violation of our code if they are there. You know.
I can't go with all this code business. There's so many codes that makes you sick to your stomach.
Sometimes very difficult.
So many codes, too many. That's what's the matter with the country.
As far as the inspections department is concerned, the only ordinance we have now is the one that talks about the size of rooms and the number of occupants. Technically, you are not in compliance with the occupancy rule. The immediate thing, of course, is to get the heat,
right.
whether you have one
That's
person
right.
or 300 in here.
Right.
We pay the 28 inspectors and their supervisors nearly $1 million a year in salary and fringe benefits to do the job.
Let's try the third floor, okay?
The I-Team has just spent several weeks watching housing inspectors at work without their knowledge. We wanted to find out if we're getting our money's worth. We are not. This is Martin Thompson, a Minneapolis housing inspector since 1969. He makes $24,300 a year. He is also a real estate broker and lakeshore land developer in his spare time, which seems to be considerable. We watched Mr. Thompson all day, October 7th. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Thompson has finished the obligatory hour in the office, which begins each housing inspector's day. He's heading for his car and, presumably, a day in search of housing code violations in his inspection district, shown here in red. We'll trace his route for you. First stop, Sambo's Restaurant at Lake and First Avenue. A coffee break. While long coffee breaks proved a rule with the housing inspectors, Thompson's was longer than most this morning. 1 hour, 5 minutes. Next, a senior citizen high-rise on Fifth Avenue. Still out of Thompson's district. It is not an inspection stop. He stays 1 hour and 34 minutes, finally emerging with 2 women. They park at a bakery on Lake Street and go inside. When they leave, laden with sacks, it is 12:45. At this point, we have paid Mr. Thompson $55.58 for the day, plus mileage. And he has performed no inspections. He has not even entered his inspection district. He returns to the high-rise and lets one of his passengers out. Then he and the remaining woman head north on Interstate 35. It is 12:50, and Mr. Thompson is heading home to Stacy, Minnesota. Minneapolis taxpayers would pay him 17 cents a mile for part of the trip. At 1:45 this afternoon, Thompson arrived here at his lakeside home near Stacy, which is about 50 miles north of the Twin Cities. It's now 3:25, and he's still there. Mr. Thompson's workday was over. He would report performing 13 inspections, but actually, he had not come within a dozen blocks of any of the places he claimed to have inspected. Nor did that prove to be an exceptional day for Inspector Thompson. We watched him on 6 different days, a total of 20 hours and 46 minutes. 4 of those days we checked at Stacy and found he had gone home at least 2.5 hours before quitting time. At no time during the 20 hours and 46 minutes did he perform a single inspection. At no time did he enter his inspection district. He received full pay for each of those days. plus mileage. Mr. Thompson declined to offer any explanation.
On October 7th, we were with you all day, and we saw that you made no inspections, and yet you entered 13 inspections on your daily report. Can you explain that?
See him up the office. They'll tell you.
This is Carl Wade, a janitor with the Minneapolis School District before he was hired as inspector in 1969. He, too, makes $24,300 a year. On October 14th, Mr. Wade first led us to a bank at Lake and Nicollet. He was there for 18 minutes. His next trip, a short one block to Kmart for 20 minutes of shopping. From there to an apartment building at 24th Street and 1st Avenue South. It is an inspection stop, the only one he will make today. It lasts 30 minutes. On his report, he'll list 3 addresses and 15 units inspected, but all are at this corner. The buildings are no more than 2 miles from the inspections office, but we will pay Mr. Wade for 30 miles of driving. Next to Wade's condominium at 13th and Hennepin. He disappears inside for 36 minutes. At noon, he returns to the city parking ramp and enters the inspection office for 1 hour to relieve another inspector on telephone duty. That chore out of the way, Mr. Wade is ready to call it a day. A quick stop at a bakery, then back home.
Carl Wade went into his condominium at 1:30. 3 hours later, at quitting time, he was still there. Total time spent inspecting during the day, 30 minutes. Total time spent not working, 5 hours. Mr. Wade claimed a full day's work, and we gave him a full day's pay, $93.60, plus mileage. Nor was Mr. Wade any more diligent the 7 other days we watched him on the job.
For example, on September 23rd, he made 3 inspection stops lasting a total of 2 hours and 10 minutes. The rest of the day, more than 4 hours, he spent at a service station, 2 grocery stores, a health clinic, a library, a liquor store, a paper store, and his home twice. The 3 inspections he made that day were all within a 1-mile radius. Mr. Wade claimed reimbursement for 26 miles. In all, we observed Mr. Wade for 16 hours and 52 minutes, of which less than 4 hours appeared to be spent working. $197.20 for 4 hours work, plus mileage.
On none of these occasions did you enter any vacation time or time off for any other reason.
Well, I don't know what to say. All I can say is that I just don't remember any of this stuff.
Carl Wade and Marty Thompson are glaring examples, but by no means the only inspectors we found collecting pay for work they didn't do and for miles they didn't drive. Tomorrow night we'll show you what several other housing inspectors did during the workday and what they claimed they did.
Now, a lot of those shots that were taken looked like they had to be aware that the camera was there, but again, those were taken from a hidden camera, many times inside a van or a car, that type of thing, right?
That's right. For more than 3 weeks, I don't believe any of the inspectors were aware that we had them under surveillance, and for 2 weeks after that, in fact, we were following them, and they didn't know they were being watched, even though they had been tipped off that they were.
Very interesting. And tomorrow night we have another segment of this report.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Al. Last night, the new Channel 4 investigative unit, the I-Team, debuted with the first in a series of 4 reports on the Minneapolis Housing Inspection Department. The report has already triggered promises of decisive action by city officials. And here's Al Austin with the second in the series.
Last night we saw 2 Minneapolis housing inspectors, Martin Thompson on the right and Carl Wade on the left, frittering away whole days on the job. Both repeatedly went home hours ahead of quitting time. Both entered phony mileage expenses, and Thompson reported making inspections he could not have performed. Today, Minneapolis Mayor Don Fraser met with the city coordinator and several aldermen about the matter. They've scheduled a news conference for tomorrow morning and promise action not only to discipline guilty inspectors, but to reform the system. For Wade and Thompson aren't the only inspectors involved. Tonight, we'll see some other housing inspectors on the job. But first, let's hear what the Supervisor of Housing Inspections, D. George Olson, expects from a housing inspector.
Is he expected to put in 8 hours of work a day?
Yes, he is expected to put in 8 hours of work.
But he does not. The day begins on a promising enough note. From 8 to 9 o'clock, the housing inspectors write up the previous day's work reports, look over complaints that have come in, and plan their day. At 9 o'clock, they leave the office to begin their inspections. It's then that the workday hits a decided snag, the coffee break.
We have a coffee break. It's really supposed to be 20 minutes, but we have gone to this. We do go up to about a half hour, very liberal there.
Liberal indeed, but we saw no half-hour coffee breaks. 45 minutes was standard, an hour or more common. Judging by those we observed, it's costing Minneapolis taxpayers $68,000 a year for the housing inspector's morning coffee break alone, and they get another one in the afternoon. Nor were the 10 inspectors we followed inclined to throw themselves into their work after coffee. On September 23rd, Inspector Jim Fairbank took a 50-minute coffee break. Later in the morning, he sat in his car beside Lake Calhoun. Then he went shopping outside his inspection district. Later, he returned to sit beside Lake Calhoun again. And then he sat beside Lake Harriet. 5 hours altogether, and not a single inspection. We didn't have him in sight the remaining 3.5 hours of the workday. We paid him $93.60 for the day, plus mileage.
Well, that's, you're alleging that.
Yes.
Well, I'm certainly not going to agree with you. I mean,
You deny that
certainly.
that you spent 5 hours at coffee breaks and sitting by the lake and visiting Sears and High Lake and driving between?
Yes, absolutely.
On September 25th, Inspector Ralph Much went right to work after leaving the office. He inspected houses for nearly 2.5 hours. But then he stopped inspecting for the next 2.5 hours. Most of that time he was here at a friend's house in South Minneapolis. This is Eric Landon, widely liked in and out of the inspection department. He makes the standard salary, $24,300 a year. We followed Mr. Landon twice. Each day began with a 1-hour, 5-minute coffee break, and each day that was followed by about an hour and a half of work. And then 2 more hours not working. On October 24th, for instance, Inspector Landon did some inspecting, picked up a relative at the bus depot, shopped for beer and pastries, had some lunch, did some more inspecting, and then arrived home 2 hours before quitting time. He spotted our camera and announced he was taking a 2-hour vacation. And finally, there is Inspector Don Howdeshell. On September 24th, Howdeshell took his usual morning coffee for 1 hour and promptly headed not toward his inspection district in northeast Minneapolis, shown here in red, but south to his home, shutting his car in the garage. And he didn't leave home for more than 3 hours. We paid him $93.60 for the day and reimbursed him for 29 miles he said he drove. 3 weeks later, we checked on Mr. Howdeshell again. Remarkably, the same thing happened. After coffee, he went home. Here he is at 10:25 a.m. pulling into his alley.
Even more remarkably, he did this just 2 days after the inspections department had discovered we were watching them. And a supervisor in a special meeting advised the inspectors to clean up their act for a while. That supervisor's speech didn't seem to shorten the coffee breaks any either. The I-team sat in on one of those gatherings, in disguise, and heard inspectors talk of taking spur-of-the-moment vacations to cover themselves, and, quote, "What we got to do is go back and dig up some of our daily reports." It was time for us to dig up some of those reports.
So, on October 30th, we paid a surprise visit to the inspections department to see what the inspectors claimed they'd done before too many hands rummaged through those records. Inspections Director Saul Jacobs saw things differently.
If you want any information from us, it's got to be cleared through the city coordinator's office.
Jacobs called our investigation insidious and underhanded.
Could have come to me as the head of the department, told me what you're after, and I would have arranged anything you wanted.
Well, if they were doing something wrong, you would have told us that?
If I knew about it.
Well, that's the reason we didn't come to you.
If they did something wrong, I would have already taken action on it.
That's right. That's why we didn't come to you, because you obviously didn't know.
The department's legal advisor, Ed Vavrick, was even more contemptuous of our request for information and refused to hear the statute authorizing us to have it.
Is public. Name, actual...
At length, the city coordinator told Jacobs to give us the records.
All right, fine. Okay. Okay, he said, in effect, if you're specific, tell us exactly what you want. We'll produce those records that you want.
Daily reports, pay records, and expense claims showed inspectors performing inspections we knew they had not performed, putting in for mileage they had not driven on the job, and claiming pay for hours they had not worked.
This is the day we followed him going home. This is all the work he says he did. Marty Thompson.
Inspector Don Howdeshell's work reports showed him working a full day the 2 days we'd seen him go home right after morning coffee. Carl Wade's September 26th report claimed he'd inspected all 37 units of the Aqua City Motel. Yet the motel's proprietors said they didn't remember his being there at all. And with many of the rooms occupied, it would have been impossible to inspect them all. Wade offered no explanation.
Nobody's going to talk to you in the department unless we clear it first.
Why is that?
For the same reason. We want some control over what people are saying. If it involves department policy.
Isn't that an abridgment of the First Amendment rights to order people not to talk?
Well, we're not saying they can't talk on their own time. If they're doing it on city time, we want to have some idea what you're after.
So they can talk to us on their own time?
Not about departmental matters,
well, again,
unless we clear it.
Even after that gag order was partially lifted several days later, few inspectors would talk to us.
I talk to you for a moment?
No, I don't think so. I got instructions. You should talk to the coordinator.
Some expressed more fear for their jobs from speaking out against Jacobs' wishes than for being caught in apparent fraud. But this one inspector agreed to talk to us anonymously.
Do you know whether there are any inspectors in that office who lie about what they do, who say they go out and do a day's work, that they inspect 7 houses when they don't?
Yes.
Are there a lot of those in the office?
I think practically everybody in the office has probably done it at one time or another.
Some more than others?
Yes.
Some habitually?
Yes. They can go out and inspect and work up a storm one day and spread the work out over 3 days of work reports.
So they do the work on one day, and then they don't do any work for a couple of days, but they still have that work of the first day to write down?
Correct.
Is that done a lot?
Yes.
By
everybody.
By everybody.
To protect that man's anonymity, we substituted another voice saying precisely his words. Despite what he said, we don't know that all Minneapolis housing inspectors are guilty of reporting work they don't do. We saw indications that some inspectors are conscientious in their work. But there is this. The 10 inspectors we observed for a total of 81 hours spent less than a fourth of that time working. If those 10 are typical, it would mean a waste of more than $500,000 a year in salary alone. In addition, much of what we saw appears to be a violation of laws, including theft of public funds, a felony. Why is this happening, and how did they get away with it? We have some answers to those questions for tomorrow's report.
When city officials are discovered not only loafing on the job, but claiming pay for work and services not rendered, then it's time for the city to take action. And that was the mood at the Minneapolis City Hall this morning, where the council and the mayor reacted to WCCO Television's I-Team investigation of fraud and mismanagement in the city's housing inspection department. Tomorrow morning, a special council meeting will be held to form a city investigation team, which will have the power to recommend firing employees and seek prosecution for any violations of the law. The council may also decide to form a panel of outside experts to probe management practices in the Housing Inspections Office.
WCCO has created an opportunity for us. The problem that they have outlined is a symptom of a larger problem. That problem is the fragmentation of the management of the city government. Accountability is not clear.
My gut reaction after I viewed the first program was fire them and suspend those people who were supervising them. We can't do that for a number of reasons. We have a civil service system, we have a grievance procedure, we have rules and regulations and laws which we treat our employees under, the contract and so forth.
So it's really a two-level, two-track effort, one to deal with the specific allegations and the other to change the system so that this kind of thing won't happen again.
Republicans and DFLers in the council are expected to clash tomorrow over how best to reform the management of the inspections office, whether to bring in outside experts or simply dust off some old neglected studies on that matter. And on tonight's report, the I-Team deals with that very matter, management and supervision in the inspections department. And here's Al Austin.
One member of the management team, housing inspection director, supervisor D. George Olson, said today that he's been looking at some of the same things we did and, quote, it kind of appears now that the pattern I've seen is that everybody's been screwing off. Tonight we look at why and how they've gotten away with it. The housing inspector's workday runs from 8 in the morning to 4:30. When we asked their boss if housing inspectors are expected to work an 8-hour day, he said yes. But inspections director Saul Jacobs went on to say that they're allowed 2 half-hour coffee breaks and an hour for lunch, which didn't add up.
So it's actually a 6.5-hour workday we're talking about. Right. Okay. Wouldn't you think, though, that a 6.5-hour workday is more liberal than most places?
No, I think private industry pretty much does the same thing.
Most city departments do the same thing?
All city departments do the same thing.
Director Jacobs is wrong. Minneapolis' largest department, Public Works, allows only one 15-minute coffee break and 30 minutes for lunch, expecting 7 hours, 45 minutes of work from employees. And civil service reckons pay on a 40-hour week, not 32 and a half.
Anyway, all the housing inspectors we watched flouted even Jacobs' liberal rules. Most used large chunks of the workday for personal matters or went home hours early. The inspectors shied away from public comments about what they'd done and why, but off camera and anonymously, several claimed that one reason so many inspectors do so little work is that they don't know what to do. That an inspector ordered to crack down on housing violations one day may be chewed out the next for stepping on important toes with his inspections, so that it's safer to just pretend to work.
I think it's primarily a matter of that he gets frustrated with the immensity of the job and the lack of support of any sort, basically, behind him.
I'm sorry to hear that they feel that we're not backing them up, because I don't think it's true. We back them up 100% unless they're wrong.
What sort of training is afforded an inspector?
Nothing, essentially. Most training involves going out with the other inspectors for a day, see what they do in their districts, and that's about it.
If some inspectors are complaining that they're poorly trained, it's because they didn't receive it. They didn't want to receive it, or they just ignored it.
I don't know how anyone could be here, say, 5 years and say they don't get enough training. What more do we have to train them at?
When the I-Team went through the inspections department records, we found that some inspectors had reported inspections they had not performed, had claimed time on the job when they were home, and had padded mileage claims.
How serious do you see the filing of false reports?
Well, I think it's a very serious matter. They're getting paid. We expect an honest day's work out of them.
Do you think it's a violation of law?
It's definitely a violation of law.
If we were able to find several people who fit that description in a matter of a few days' investigation, why couldn't you?
Okay, the only defense I have is that we're shorthanded in supervisory personnel.
There are 2 field supervisors who are expected to review the work of the inspectors and spend half days with those inspectors in the field. And yet,
We never see them out in the field. There is no follow-up as to what you have been doing by the supervisory personnel. There's no accountability.
The supervisors are never in the field?
I have never met one in the field.
They do get out in the field. At least they leave here, they get mileage. I check that. I assume they're doing some of this work.
This is Field Supervisor Don Johnson, the man who should be out in the field, should catch housing inspectors filing false reports and stretching lunch hours. On October 2nd, Johnson spent the morning in the office. At 10 minutes past 12, he began his lunch. It's now after 1:30. When he leaves his parking spot, he'll return to the office. Johnson's lunch hours on other days appeared to stretch to nearly 2 hours. And then on October 8th, we found him home an hour and 15 minutes before quitting time. He put in for a full day's work each of the days in question.
Anything you want to know about me or my job, you can talk to Mr. Dronin.
Well, can't you answer for yourself?
No.
Does that mean you won't answer for yourself?
If there's anything you want to know about me or my job, you can see Mr. Dronin.
What I want to know is, we noticed you on a number of occasions taking lunch hours from an hour and a half to 2 hours long, and also we saw you home an hour and a quarter before quitting time. What does that mean?
I just told you, if you want to see anything or talk about my job or me, see Mr. Dronin.
Don't you think you have an obligation to explain how you supervise the inspectors?
See Mr. Dronin.
How can Mr. Dronin answer for you? He doesn't know where you were on those days. He doesn't know whether you're going out in the field, does he?
This is my answer.
Getting back to how we supervise the supervisors, it's really no different than how we supervise the men. These are adults we're dealing with. We assume they're good people, that they're putting in an honest day's work. Now, if we find out otherwise, of course, we would take proper disciplinary action against them.
Incidentally, on the day we followed Mr. Johnson from the office to lunch and back to the office, he put in for 30 miles. Tomorrow, the last in this series, though not the last report on the subject, and a commentary. Doug?
What's the viewer response been so far, Al?
I think it's no exaggeration to say that we've heard from hundreds of people who have seen signs or at least sensed the same ailments that we discovered in this investigation. And I think they've expressed gratitude that someone has noticed this, that their suspicions have been confirmed, and at the same time they're absolutely outraged that these people, public servants, would be systematically wasting their money.
And tomorrow night, the last in the series, right?
Right.
Okay. And we'll be back with more news right after this word. For the past 3 nights, WCCO Television News' investigative team has been documenting cases of fraud and mismanagement in the Minneapolis Housing Inspections Department. IT member Al Austin has shown inspectors lying about the work they've done, faking work reports, padding mileage expense records, and putting in much less than a full day's work for a full day's pay. The City Council today took action on the I-Team investigation. An outside blue ribbon panel was formed to look into the management of the inspections department. The council offered 17 recommendations to prevent future abuses in that department, and it was clear that some criminal action may be taken.
From what you have observed of this situation, are there misdemeanor or felony crimes involved?
We have in the past prosecuted persons for filing false statements as to their hours of work and collecting money on that.
How about the allegations that are made as they relate to putting down for mileage that they did not have coming and they did not earn, they did not use? Is that a crime?
It'd probably be, depending on the amount, I assume would be in the misdemeanor category.
Meanwhile, City Coordinator Dave Nicholas announced his own plan to deal with the housing abuses. He's forming his own I-Team. And now here's Al Austin with Part 4 of the I-Team series.
We'll be waiting eagerly for these city officials to act, and we'll report what they do or don't do to correct the abuses in the inspections department. One remaining question in the story: is the city's housing needlessly deteriorating because housing inspectors aren't doing their work, or are there too many inspectors and not enough for them to do? Here's a brief review of the ironic evidence the I-Team found in the search for that answer.
For over 2 years, the neighbors have been complaining about the ramshackle appearance of this house in northeast Minneapolis. For more than 2 years, one of the tenants, Barbara Belargin, has been complaining about conditions inside the house: mice holes in the baseboard, lack of insulation, dangerous electrical wiring.
got mice upstairs in the walls.
You complained to Mancino, you mean?
To Mancino.
Yeah.
But
You haven't complained to the housing inspector?
They have upstairs.
And for more than 2 years, Minneapolis housing inspectors have been telling the landlord, James Mancino, to fix the place up. But there it sits. Whether this is a story of ineffectual enforcement by housing inspectors or merely the law's natural delay, it's just one of countless examples of the fact that maintaining a city's housing is not easy. Saul Jacobs, Minneapolis Inspections Director, says the problem is a manpower shortage.
There's really too much work to be done for the number of personnel that we have.
And yet, if there is so much work to be done, how were we able to find so many housing inspectors with apparently so little to do? Inspector Martin Thompson repeatedly going home in the middle of the day, avoiding his inspection district entirely. Inspector Don Howdeshell going home after morning coffee. Inspector Carl Wade killing time hours on end. Inspector Jim Fairbanks spending half the day sitting beside city lakes. Inspector after inspector stretching coffee breaks past an hour. Supervisor Don Johnson taking double lunch hours and going home from work early himself, while failing to notice his inspectors wasting their days and filing obviously phony work reports and mileage claims.
We shouldn't assume that all 28 Minneapolis housing inspectors are like those we've seen in these reports. Some have reputations as hard workers. But it'd also be naive to suppose that we just happen to find the only ones who are cheating us. We watched 10 inspectors and a supervisor. All cheated somehow. Something is very wrong in the inspections department. These people make unlikely criminals. I doubt that many even thought of what they were doing and not doing as breaking the law. It was just the way things are. Some I talked to are relieved it's out in the open. I feel certain they'd far rather have been doing their jobs well than wasting their days and our money. But missing is a sense of purpose. What exactly are they supposed to do? There they are, referees between angry tenants and angry landlords and complex laws, armed only with catch-as-catch-can training and backed by an administration that isn't paying any attention. Villains? Here are some. Aldermen, who don't act to trim a department grown notoriously fat and lazy, who yell, "lay off," when an active inspector riles the wrong constituents, then are shocked at inspectors loafing. A civil service commission that sometimes protects unfit employees. Supervisors who don't supervise. Inspections Director Saul Jacobs, who considers the haphazard training good enough for a job he admits is very tough, who shrugged off the matter of inspectors padding mileage claims because it doesn't amount to much money, and who has worked harder at keeping a lid on the whole problem than at dealing with it. And all those of us who hear about wasted time and chiseling and figure, well, that's the civil service for you, the practice field for retirement, while the ragged edges of our trust in government fray a little more. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't a job with the government be something special? Yes, Minneapolis has been betrayed by its housing inspectors, not because we expected too much from them, but because we've expected too little.